This is my brother. 716 million people who earn less than $100 a year. This is me, American. Average income $5,500 a year. This is my brother. 820 million people who are barely existing on 1 meal a day. This is me, 3 squares a day, or 4, or 5. The wheel of fortune has spun and stopped on me, USA. The American dream. I am the world's richest man, the American. What is my obligation to my fellow Americans and the rest of the world? One piece of paper, payable to bearer on demand. IOU, my brother.
Insight, religious principles underlying American democracy, the fundamental connection between faith and freedom.
How do you do? My name's Father Kieser. It's hard to realize, isn't it, that our century, despite its technocracy and science, is afflicted with such terrible misery and poverty. We pride ourselves on our agricultural know-how, and yet according to studies taken by the United Nations, 3 out of 4 human beings now alive lack an adequate diet. We brag of our skills in construction, and yet 1/2 of the world's peoples at the present time do not have a place to live. They have no decent roof over their head, no place to call home. We speak of our progress in medical science, and yet there are vast areas of the world's surface where 3 out of every 4 children die before adolescence. Last year, more people died of starvation than were gassed in Hitler's concentration camps. Last year, more people were killed by disease than by Nazi bullets in World War II. And all the destitution is not overseas. Here in America, there are pockets of poverty. There are depressed areas. There are inhuman working conditions. There are Americans who go to bed hungry at night, who live in substandard housing, who lack adequate educational opportunities. We have been able to put a man up into space, but we're having difficulty putting food into that empty space in many a child's stomach. I don't know how you would react to this situation, but I suspect you are appalled. You should be, for this situation is deplorable. It is a blight on human history. It must be changed. It will be changed when hundreds and thousands of individuals like you and me do our part.
Now hold it right there. Before you start talking about the obligations of wealth, let me tell you that I built this factory with my own hands. I'm the guy who put up the dough, took all the risks. Nobody's going to tell me what to do with my profits. Nobody's going to take this factory away from me.
His profit? Look, we guys do the labor in this plant. It was our sweat, our pain that built this place. We're entitled to the whole works, us, not him.
You see there? That's just what I've been telling the legislature. The owner and the worker can't get on with each other. So now we come in with the government, and we take over the factory, fill it with political appointees, property of the state.
Our enemies would like the whole world to believe that all Americans are like these 3 caricatures, that in this country, labor management and government are obsessed only by their own selfish interests. But you and I know that this is not the case. Certainly there are exceptions, but a genuine concern for the common good is much more typical of the American way of life. We have learned, sometimes the hard way, that technological progress is not enough. Social progress is even more important. Each of us must realize his obligations to his brother, and all of us must work for the common good. This steam engine, invented by James Watt in 1769, changed the world because it put great power into the hands of mankind. But unfortunately, it first set brother against brother in turmoil and greed. It started the Industrial Revolution. It created the need for a social revolution.
Before the year 1770, manufacturing was done in the home. The spinning wheel, the loom. Peoples of the world lived close to the earth. Farmers, herders, fishermen. Life was simple, frugal, poor. But when man had discovered the power of steam, a new force was loosed on the world. To drive locomotives, propel ships, turn printing presses. Most important, a steam engine could be harnessed to a loom. Raw wool and cotton spun into thread and fabric. Larger looms were built. They were gathered into a single location. The factory and the mill were born. The genie, this steam engine, had an appetite. It demanded iron and coal. Blast furnaces, foundries lit up the sky. Out of this, wealth and progress were showered on a yearning world. Population began to shift. Nations of independent farmers and craftsmen became nations of factory workers and mill hands. And as great wealth mushroomed at the top, poverty and suffering ran rife at the bottom. For the new historic production highs, a terrible human price was paid. Conditions were barely above the level of beasts. Children were driven into brutal, unhealthy toil, repeating the same trivial operations 15 and 20 hours a day. New diseases began attacking man. Women, never before out of their homes, were now grubbing their wages in the dark and sooty mill. Women and children worked cheaper than men. Their nimble fingers were the ones in demand. As late as 1830, over half the laborers in the English cloth-making business were under 18 years old. Slowly, the conscience of nations began to be prodded. In 1802, a Health and Morals Act was passed in England, limiting working hours of children to 12 per day. But it was not enforced. In 1833, then 1842, stricter laws were passed. It became illegal to allow children under 14 to mine coal. But what of the men who owned these factories? How could they justify such inhuman policies? In truth, they had no justification. They took all they could for their own profit. In those days, labor was considered only as an element of production. A man named Ricardo said, "The natural price of labor is that price necessary to enable the laborers to subsist and perpetuate the race without either increase or diminution." In other words, to eke out the barest survival. Labor unions were considered illegal. Wealth was concentrated into the hands of the very few. And with it went tremendous power. Power over the lives of thousands of other human beings. Power, too, over the government. Such was the condition of England's laboring classes when, in 1850, an angry voice of protest echoed over the continent. A German intellectual, Karl Marx, wrote a pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto.
This cannot go on. No human being should be treated as these human beings are. Starvation wages, men being destroyed by the machine, exploitation. It is not right. It must not continue. I will change it. I have a plan. Human society is like a giant anthill. It has its workers, its drones, and its organizations. It follows a certain pattern. It has and obeys definite laws. I understand this pattern. I have discovered these laws, and this is why I am able to foresee the future and solve man's problems. All this talk about freedom is nonsense. Man has instincts. He must obey them. He has economic needs. He must satisfy them. He is different from the other animals only because he can organize his actions to meet his physical needs. Let's be realistic. Matter in motion is all that exists. Your religion says there is a God. But let's face it, I can't see God, or touch him, or feel him. God is an illusion. Religion is an opiate, a pie-in-the-sky promise used by capitalists to help kill the revolutionary spirit and keep the poor where they are. I say to you, follow my blueprint, and you can build a heaven for yourself upon this earth. The exploitation of the poor by the rich is inevitable. But it can't last. Already the workers are getting restive. Soon they will begin to fight back. Class struggle is inevitable. The more violent, the better. What is the cause of the children in the mines? The starvation wages, the misery. There is only one answer: private property. Private property is the root of all evil. What's the solution? I know. I have the blueprint. Collective ownership. Abolish private property. Let the workmen run the factories and the mines and the mills, and then there will be no more poverty. There will be no more exploitation, no more injustice. Heaven will have arrived upon earth.
Marx saw the problem clearly, and he faced it honestly. But he tried to solve it with erroneous philosophical premises, and that is why his solution has not worked. Here in America, we reject his solution. We despise communism and everything it stands for. But in doing so, we cannot afford to close our eyes to the problem he tried but failed to solve. For that problem is still with us. This problem is economic, because it concerns wages and prices and working conditions. But basically, this problem is human, because it concerns man and his dignity. I don't think we can solve this problem until we have a well-thought-out notion of what a human being is and what he's supposed to be doing with his life. Here in America, we have always been convinced that man is a being made in the image and likeness of God. What is it that makes you like God? First of all, your mind, which enables you to understand the world and take the material universe within yourself. And secondly, your will. That will of yours that's free, that gives you control over your own actions and enables you to love. Freedom is your most precious possession, because freedom, more than anything else, makes you like God. With your freedom, you can achieve your destiny. You can order your life in such a way as to spend all eternity in the companionship of God. Let's face the facts here. We've got to be realistic. You can get a certain measure of happiness in this world, but you can get perfect happiness only in the next.
Look, all this talk about heaven is fine, Father, but I'm worried about the here and now, not the hereafter. Oh, sure, I want to get to heaven, but I've also got, well, I've got to feed my family. I've got to pay the rent. That's my big concern. Now, what's all this pie-in-the-sky stuff have to do with what I take home on Saturday night?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. The fact that you've got a soul, that you're a human being, that you're going to spend all eternity in the companionship of God. This makes you pretty important, doesn't it? It means you've got rights, you've got dignity. It's bound to affect the way you work and the way you treat other people.
Yeah, but I still don't see how all this shakes down to me, to my work, to the way people treat me. Because I never saw any angels floating around my place.
Well, nobody's saying you're an angel, Joe. You've got a soul, but you've also got a body. And that body's a pretty important part of your personality. It enables you to express yourself. You couldn't work without that body.
Well, I guess now you're talking my language, Father, because it seems to me that most of my life is spent working. But what I'd like to do is get some fun out of life. How am I going to get some satisfaction?
Well, if you play it right, there's no reason why you can't get a great deal of satisfaction out of your work itself. You know, God didn't create work to be unpleasant and burdensome.
All right. Then how do I go about it? How do I get this satisfaction?
Well, really by using your mind and will in your work. You've probably noticed that work that's strictly routine, work in which you have no interest, bores you. You don't enjoy it at all. But work, on the other hand, that makes you think, that forces you to exercise initiative and assume responsibility. This kind of work you find exciting.
Well, I'm with you on that, Father. You know, I used to work in a gas station for one of the big oil companies. Well, I guess it was all right. The pay was pretty good. But I must admit, I got bored with it all. You know, I just did what I had to do. Well, I'd fill the gas tank, and I'd wipe the windshields and stamp the credit card, but I didn't really care whether I did a good job or not. But now, I got my own station. I work a lot longer, I work a lot harder, and I don't really make any more money. But you know something? I think I feel happier now inside, because this is my station, and these are all my customers. I'm responsible for the whole thing. I tell you, now I smile when I wipe off that windshield and when I stamp the credit card.
Well, that's the way it should be, Joe. It's good for a man to be his own boss and to control his own surroundings. That kind of work enriches a man by involving him.
Yeah, but you still haven't said anything, Father, about the rent and my kids. Now, they've got to eat. Now, all this talk about manna from heaven, that's fine. But I've got to put bread on the table. And then, you see, it's not just the present so much that worries me. It's the future. I keep thinking, what if I should keel over? What would happen to them?
Well, this is why private property is so important. Private property raises you above a hand-to-mouth existence. It gives you security, and it leaves you something to give to the children if you should die.
Well, but that's what I want, Father. See, because when I got married, I didn't have very much. Oh, maybe about $300 in the bank. That was about all. But I've worked hard since then, and things are better for me now. My car's almost paid for. All the equipment in the gas station is mine. And not only that, I have an insurance policy. That's not bad, huh? And look, Ruth and I just bought our own home. You know, owning things seems to make a big difference because you really feel that you've got something to fall back on, sort of a little nest egg. So now, if I should get sick, or even if I should lose the gas station, I don't think it would be the end of the world for me.
Well, have these possessions changed your attitude much? I mean, do you look at life differently now?
Oh, I think so, yes. For the better, too. I know I work harder because, well, what I make is my own. And I'm always trying to figure out ways, ways to boost business, how to do a better job. And having the house has made a big difference, too. When we first got married, we lived in a rented house. I know I didn't feel very close to it because it wasn't mine. And if you must know the facts, I didn't take very good care of it either. But now, gee, it sure is different because this house is my own. I've earned it. My family lives in it. My roots are right here. We take more interest in the neighborhood and in the school, too. Look, my kids go to that school and they play in this neighborhood. Now, I'm not going to let anybody run it down, am I? Of course not, because I have a big king-size steak right here. And you know something? Wait till you hear this. Ruthie and I, well, we're actually on the PTA committee. How about that?
I think Joe's experience is very revealing. Private property has a great contribution to make to an individual's life. It has a lot to do for you. It can stimulate your initiative. It can help you develop a sense of personal responsibility. And it can serve as a bulwark of your freedom. A man who has property is less susceptible to outside pressures, and he's more independent of his surroundings. I think if you take a look through history, you'll see that every time private property has been denied, some type of tyranny has resulted. The man who has no property can so easily be enslaved either by other individuals or by the totalitarian state. Now, this isn't to say that private property is an unlimited right. It's not. It imposes obligations. Those who have more than they need are obliged to help those who are not so fortunate. Andrew Carnegie, the great American industrialist, puts it this way. He says, surplus wealth is a sacred trust which its possessor is bound to administer for the good of the community. In other words, the ownership of property is private, but its use must be social. This is the point our divine Lord makes in his parable of Lazarus and the rich man.
There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and feasted sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus who was at his gate full of sores. desiring to be filled with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table, and no one did give him. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died, and he was buried in hell.
The rich man went to hell not because he was rich, but because he refused to use his wealth in the service of others. We are indeed our brother's keeper. His need is our common concern. And this is why those who are rich in talent, in power, in the material things of life, are obliged to do what they can to help the poor. And the poor are obliged to help themselves. All of us must work together to enable the maximum number of our citizens to enjoy the advantages of private property. To achieve this equitably, with justice and charity for all, is no easy job. But it can be accomplished, and it will be accomplished, as all elements of our society work together for the common good.
As president of this company, I believe I have 3 responsibilities. I must give the workers a decent family wage and humane working conditions. I owe my stockholders a reasonable return on their investment, and I owe the public a good product at fair prices.
As a union shop steward, I also have obligations. We members of the union have a duty to be fair and reasonable. In the old days, maybe we used to compete with management too much, each of us grabbing as much as he could. That was no good. They've got their problems, we've got ours.
I think Teddy Roosevelt stated our government position clearly. He said, "The corporation has come to stay, and the trade union has come to stay. Each can do and has done great good. Each should be favored as long as it does good. But each should be sharply checked where it acts against law and justice." In other words, the common good is the ultimate criterion. Everything else must be judged by it.
In business, you have to have an overall policy. We in management don't want to be pushed around, and we don't want to push anybody else around. We've worked out a policy with our workers to enable them to share in the profits of this company.
But we can't expect to get without giving. We've got a responsibility to turn in an honest day's work, whether the foreman's checking or not. We have a responsibility to turn out a high-quality product. Our union is our responsibility, too. Each member has a duty to participate in its affairs and see that it is run honestly and democratically.
As I see good government, it must try to keep social progress apace with economic progress so that all classes of citizens may share in the increased productivity of industry. But we must always remember that the nation's economy is primarily the creation of the personal initiative of the individual citizen. Government is in the role of an umpire to direct, stimulate, integrate the various elements of the nation. It's wrong for the government to assume those functions that private enterprise can do better. Government's job is to help the people help themselves, not to spoon feed them, not to make them dependent, but to encourage them to use their God-given freedom in the service of the common good.
We've come a long way since Karl Marx's erroneous manifesto of 1850. By using our freedom to work for the common good, we have disproven most of his contentions. He said that class conflict was inevitable. And yet today in America, all across our land, we find labor and management and government working together to eliminate the last pockets of poverty and to enable all our citizens to live on a level compatible with human dignity. He said that man is intrinsically selfish. And yet today we are finding that an increasing number of our citizens are willing to subordinate their own selfish interests to the common good. He said that greed is the basic human drive. And yet today we find millions of Americans willing to give of their own wealth in order to help their brothers. Yes, we've made a great deal of progress. We've solved many of the problems posed by the Industrial Revolution. But we cannot afford to rest on our oars, because our job is just beginning. We are achieving the common good of the United States. Now we must turn our energies to the common good of the world. What we have accomplished in America, we must help all men in all parts of the world to likewise accomplish. In Jakarta, Hong Kong, Bogota, New Delhi, and into thousands of towns and cities across the world, there are human beings who live in abject poverty. Through no fault of their own, these people lack the food, the clothing, the shelter they need to lead a decent human existence. These people are just like we are. They have an immortal soul, a supernatural destiny. They are our brothers. We are one family under God. And this is why we cannot turn a hard heart to their plight. We cannot, with our power in this country, our know-how and our wealth, we cannot remain indifferent to them. We cannot. In the past we have not, and in the future we shall not. And we want to help these people, not only because we need their support in the Cold War, not first of all to prevent them from becoming communists, but we want to help them first and foremost because they are human beings, and therefore our brothers. What can you do to help them? Several things. First, you can support all those private organizations that are engaged in their service. They need your help in order to function. You can give to them. Give generously. Give until it hurts. And secondly, you can actively take an interest in your government's programs of foreign aid. Through your elected representatives, you can make sure that those programs are intelligently administered and that the aid actually reaches those who need it. In doing so, you can be certain you will be doing the will of that man who said,
For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you covered me. Sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.
IOU, my brother. This is the American challenge. This is the debt God means us to pay. Free men, we Americans, blessed in bounty. We can pay it. We will.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their nation as witnesses to the religious truth which underlies American freedom.